Okay, back to the top story here in Parliament. Conservative Party leader Pierre was hoping to make it a little more difficult for Liberals to vote against his pipeline motion. Today, he amended it to include even more of the government's own words in the Memorandum of Understanding it signed with Alberta. But the government won't bite.
And if he votes against the motion, he's voting against a pipeline to the Pacific. He's voting against overriding the discriminatory and anti-Canadian ban on shipping our energy abroad. He's voting against consultation with the First Nations people and the British Columbia government, and he's even voting against his own beloved carbon capture and storage, all of which I took word for word right out of his own deal.
Mr. Speaker, I'm not a lifelong member of this House, so I don't know all the rules, but I don't think there's a limit on the size of motions. And in fact, since the MOU is already translated, I think it would be very easy to take the entire MOU in both official languages and propose them if the members opposite would support everything that the Premier of Alberta has done.
Corey Hogan is an Alberta Liberal MP and the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Energy and Natural Resources, and he joins me now. Corey Hogan, it's good to see you.
It's great to be here in studio.
I'm sure you didn't know, or maybe you did know. Just quick reaction to Ambassador Hillman stepping down. Any thoughts there?
No, I mean, not really. I got it from you here on here live in the studio, and I'll be processing that, of course, and it'll be very interesting to see what the next move is. Okay,
well, the next move right now for you will be to go back to Parliament and vote on this motion. You've made very clear how you feel about this motion, that it cherry picks sections of the MOU. If the full MOU was put to the House of Commons for a vote, as the Prime Minister suggests, are you confident it would pass?
Oh, I mean, most certainly. There wouldn't be a question in my mind. Presumably, first of all, if the Conservatives moved it, they would vote for it. The Liberal caucus would vote for it, and that's enough votes right there. You know, I don't know where the Bloc and the NDP would be on that particular MOU, but I do know that it's broadly supported by Canadians, and when something's broadly supported by Canadians, it's usually broadly supported by politicians.
You think the Conservatives would vote for a memorandum of understanding that calls for a $130 a ton effective carbon price in Alberta?
You know, they've been very clear that they didn't want to put that into their amendment. I asked the Leader of the Opposition if he would do that today in the House of Commons. He wasn't willing to do that. But I think it would be tough for them to vote against a memorandum of understanding that Danielle Smith has supported, a memorandum of understanding that Scott Moe has supported, the one that Doug Ford has supported. So I think that we would probably see a couple of members of the Conservatives behind the curtains, maybe, and you would see it proceed.
But what about your caucus, Corey Hogan? Because Tim Hodgson said today the caucus is supportive of the entire MOU.
Yeah.
Do you agree with that statement, that everyone in caucus is fully on board with every sentence of the MOU?
I mean, the absolute statements often come and bite you in this game, so I'm not sure I'll be as bold as Tim, but I'll tell you, our conversations broadly amongst members, I'm not saying specifically in the caucus environment, have been that, yes, they support it. Yes, it's a good balance, and that balance allows people to see themselves in it. Because really, what member is not going to be supportive if at the end of the day, that is the will of Indigenous peoples, that is the will of British Columbia, and what member is not going to be supportive of something that is going to increase the effective price of carbon in Alberta from $25 a ton to $130 a ton?
But that's a finalized deal, not the memorandum of understanding, right? So I look at what Stephen Guilbeault has said since he resigned, what he wrote in the Toronto Star. He said this is a grand bargain that feels like a fire sale. Eric St. Pierre, Patrick Weiler, others in your caucus have voiced big concerns about this. So it's unclear to me that every Liberal would vote yes if the Prime Minister got his way and the whole thing went to a vote right now.
Yeah, again, I don't want to talk in absolute statements, but I do think that you would have an overwhelming majority of Liberal MPs support, and maybe an absolute unanimity on that particular point. And the reason is because the Prime Minister has done a careful job of balancing interests here, balancing the interests on the environmental side, economic side, making sure we're unlocking both, while also making ourselves less reliant on the United States. And that's very broadly popular in the Liberal caucus.
So it is not broadly popular with the government of British Columbia, as you well know. David Eby has voiced his concern. He accepts that he has no legal ability to stop this. This was settled with the TMX pipeline fight. But help me understand how you view BC's role in this, whether or not they have a veto, as the Conservatives say, because we've heard from the Prime Minister and we heard from Minister de Bruzen today that BC needs to agree.
Yeah.
That's not the phrasing in the black and white text of the MOU. It says they need to be engaged and consulted. Yeah. Agreement is not the standard.
Well, look, there's a practical reality. You never want to give somebody a literal veto. That results in game playing, but we expect best efforts to be made by all parties and that we get to a place where we can have serious, thoughtful conversations about really important moments for the country. Like, we are in the middle of a trade war. We have imperatives we did not have even 12 months ago. And I think David Eby understands that as well. His comments have been a lot more measured when it comes to the idea of a coastal pipeline, period. It's really when it starts getting to the tanker ban that he's been much more resistant. But this is the start of a conversation. It is not the end of one.
Right, but there are important unanswered questions in this conversation. Like, what if BC never agrees? Like, how far do you go as a government?
I mean, you get into these hypotheticals, and the minute you define what you're going to do, you've created no range of motion for yourself. And we don't want to negotiate in public. I think this is a conversation between the governments of Alberta, Canada, British Columbia, and also First Nations peoples. And everybody's going to have to be involved, including people beyond that from the business community, for example, when we talk about the Pathways Project, which is a major component of this as well. So don't want to get too far ahead of it. Don't want to overstate anything. Certainly don't want to put anything out there that down the road might need to be, modified or negotiated. But we're at the start, and what's positive is this start sees a number of agreements on a number of issues that the federal government and Alberta have been at odds, frankly, on for many, many years.
Right. Look, and I can appreciate that there are trigger points and sequencing and, to use the language of mega projects, there will be decision gates, right, that these things have to go through. But there is also the vested interests of British Columbia, of the First Nations that come together under the Great Bear Initiative of the Coastal First Nations. This is not a hypothetical to them, right? And I go back to something else Minister Hodgson said today, that industry wants certainty, that capital expended can lead to profit. Explaining how you would deal with provincial opposition and First Nations opposition provides that certainty, right? Like, we're a bit beyond hypothetical at this point.
Yeah, and look, this will not be an easy thing, but it's a hard thing worth doing, and there's lots of tough conversations that need to occur over the next bit, and some of those conversations are between Alberta and First Nations, some are between us, Alberta and First Nations. There are many, many ways this can unfold, and I don't want to prejudge how it's going to unfold, but what I can tell you is we've got the foundation to have a pipeline to the West Coast that would significantly increase exports off to Asia, which would reduce our reliance on the United States. And that is a very good thing. And that is a thing that the Liberal caucus can support.
The pushback from British Columbia, as you well know, has been that, hypothetical or not, the risk to the projects they have agreement with their First Nations is real. That consent for the transmission line in the North Coast, consent for LNG pipelines and facilities could fall apart if this is pushed too hard.
Well, look, it's absolutely fair ball to say that projects can affect other projects. Decisions do not happen in isolation. Absolutely agreed, which is why the MOU has such strong language about the need for Indigenous consultation and Indigenous participation in all of these things. But it also, I think, underlines a point about why this Conservative motion is so ridiculous. These things are connected. You cannot take just one piece and separate it and say, we're just going to deal with this in isolation. That's fantasy land. That's thinking about things in ways that governments just can't get away with, frankly, especially in this complex world. So, look, I think that David Eby raises a valid point, but I think it's a bit overstated because we are at the start of that conversation and we are going to involve many people in that conversation.
Well, look, I appreciate consultations baked into the MOU, but it's also baked into the jurisprudence of Canada,
Absolutely.
right? Like, this is why the original Northern Gateway was overturned in June of 2016, if memory serves, after being approved in June of 2014, because there's a failure to do proper consultation. So that safeguard already exists, but when you speak to people from those nations, they've fought this fight multiple times in the past decade, and they feel like they're gearing up for it again, right?
Yeah, again, different conditions, different views within First Nations. There's, there's views expressed publicly by political actors, and there's views expressed privately by political actors. All of these things are in the mix here. But, I actually reread that decision last night because it seemed somewhat germane to the conversations we were having. And, that was about like a phase 4 consultation and the fact that it didn't broadly consider issues. It was insufficiently narrowed. Timelines were blown. There were I's that needed to be dotted, T's that needed to be crossed. And frankly, the government of the time, the Harper government, did not do those things. But I think that is the cautionary tale we need to bring into this conversation, which again, coming back to this motion, is why you have to be very careful when you introduce these things. And I don't think the Conservatives were particularly careful in introducing this motion, which they've now amended. I think that's some evidence that they didn't get it right even in their own minds the first time, to strengthen language about consultations. But consultation cannot be a checkbox exercise. When I read that study or that decision again, what I really am taken by is you can't say, yes, we're going to consult, yes, we're going to consult, but have your actions not match that. And to decree an outcome at this point would be doing exactly that. And that causes enormous risk to the project. I think the Conservatives have actually today really, they've done something that could damage the actual, opportunity for us to build a pipeline in this country.
No, look, they're very clearly just trying to hammer a wedge into the fault lines that exist in your caucus on this, because there is mixed views on it. Maybe not in the cabinet anymore, but certainly in caucus, people have different opinions on this, and they want the clips of the votes and these things. But this is still a process that is being driven by your government in conjunction with the government of Alberta. And I guess what I'm trying to get some clarity on, and not in a trick you and trap you kind of way.
I mean, I'm a parliamentarian. I'm used to that.
I hear you. But just how much energy and political capital the Mark Carney government is willing to expend for this, because signing this deal with Daniel Smith was no small thing, considering it's cost Stephen Guilbeault, Net Zero Advisory Board members, the abandoning of the Paris targets for 2030, for example. But to then call it a hypothetical pipeline, right, as some have, the cost expended doesn't seem to add up. So how far are you willing to go as a government?
Well, listen, you're right. It was no small thing. It was a very tricky deal that I think the Prime Minister was uniquely able to make happen. And he has put significant political capital in trying to make sure our economy will be stronger, environmental regulations will be more durable, and also that we're less reliant on the United States. He's not going to walk away from this. This is something that we want to do, something Canada needs to do. And it would be great to work with the opposition on getting it done, because we do agree about the need to increase access to the West Coast. But it's got to be done the right way. Canadians expect it to be done the right way. And there's ways we can do that. There certainly are.
Okay, Corey Hogan, I appreciate you coming in and wading through the breaking news with us. I know you got to go back to Parliament Hill and vote. Okay. We appreciate this. Corey Hogan, Calgary MP and Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Natural Resources.
Cheers, thank you.
Thank you, sir. Well, if television is about pictures, we have dramatic images there for you. If television is about pictures, these are dramatic images. There's 55 seconds left for a vote call. Moments from now in the House of Commons, MPs will vote on a Conservative motion calling for a new oil pipeline to the Pacific Coast. Now, that is the hallway that MPs have been walking down to walk into the House of Commons. We expect to see Prime Minister Mark Carney come down that way if he's not already inside the House of Commons. The Conservatives say this motion was meant to show that there is actual division within the Liberal caucus. They're not really serious about this pipeline, and for the Prime Minister to prove he is, in fact, serious about building a pipeline to the coast.
We know what the Prime Minister's plan is. He wants to pretend that he supports a pipeline like the majority of Canadians, just long enough to get through the next election, while he quietly whispers to his Keep It in the Ground caucus, "It will never happen. Don't worry. Just hang tight with me and be quiet. We'll kill it after the election."
All right, the Liberals have already said they will be voting against the motion, insisting that doesn't mean the government has given up on its agreement with Alberta and that the entire caucus supports the entire deal.
People can have issues with particular pieces, but we are supportive of the entire MOU.
You are supportive, but there are many of your other caucus members who are not supportive.
The caucus is supportive of the entire MOU. People, yes.
Okay, here to talk about the politics of play and walk through the vote with us is the Power Panel. We've got Supriya Dwivedi, who is an advisor to former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Gary Keller is the former Chief of Staff to Conservative Cabinet Ministers, a former Chief of Staff. He's not the only one. Andrew Thompson is a former Saskatchewan NDP Cabinet Minister, and here with me in the studio is Tonda McCharles. She is the Ottawa Bureau Chief for the Toronto Star. Okay, we see the whips walking down. If we can put that up on the screen to get ready for the votes. I am told the Prime Minister is not in the House of Commons and will not be in the House of Commons. Tonda, let's start with you as we wait for this. What we're going to see is a vote on the amendments in that Pierre Poilievre had his motion, amended it today to put more words into it, and then we'll get to the vote of whatever emerges from that. What do you make of what we're seeing with this issue today?
Well, look, it is a lot of political mischief making. It is an effort by the Conservatives to use the tools at their disposal to show divisions within the Liberal caucus. And the Liberals are pushing back, saying there is no division, but you guys are being mean-spirited and you're not taking account of everything this agreement will do. But truth be told, there are divisions in the Liberal caucus. It'll be interesting to see, because while it's not a whipped vote, we've been assured that all Liberals are going to basically vote as one against the Conservative motion. In other words, try to show a common front, a show of unity. Perhaps there'll be some that will break away here. I think some of the tension has gone out of it. But what the Conservatives have been very successful in doing is showing that they're not all on the same page. Tim Hodgson can claim they are all he wants, but there's an op-ed piece by Stephen Guilbeault in the Toronto Star today saying, I'm not on board with this. This is not a great idea.
Well, as luck would have it, I have a printed off copy of that right here because I felt this might be relevant. The opening line of it, Supriya, is, it's a grand bargain that feels like a fire sale. Last I checked, Stephen Guilbeault still in caucus, not in cabinet. And I've talked to other members of the caucus aren't comfortable with this. Cabinet now, down one, or changed one, is fully behind it. What do you make of what we're going to see today?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with what Tonda said. I think it's both a smart political move for the Conservatives to be pressing the government on this, but it's also kind of dumb and silly because it's not like it's ultimately going to matter all that much because your average Canadian isn't exactly watching all of the theatrics and the political hijinks over this. The end of the day, anytime the opposition can sort of back the government into a bit of a corner, it's a good day for the opposition. But I would just say that given that a good chunk of the appeal of Prime Minister Carney over Mr. Poilievre is that the Prime Minister is a serious guy with serious credentials for a very serious time serving for the country. I'm not sure this is the kind of thing that overall boosts Poilievre's appeal to the broader swath of the electorate. And, as much as the goal of this exercise was to showcase the division within the Liberal caucus, and I agree with Tonda, there are absolutely divisions within the Liberal caucus. I think it also kind of highlights this major awkward issue for the Conservatives because they're so bizarrely and brazenly anti any pollution pricing that it's quite literally putting them offside with their Alberta cousins and ultimately, the MOU. So I don't know, it's like a wash, essentially, from my perspective.
Okay, from what I can see in the little screen in my desk here is that they've started the vote. Andrew Scheer was the first person up to vote. I did not see Mr. Poilievre there, unless I missed it. But the voting has started on the amendment in the House of Commons. There you go. You can see the shot there now. Gary Keller, what do you make of this? I mean, Supriya is similar to what Corey Hogan was saying earlier, that this is a ridiculous stunt at a serious time when you need serious leadership, and this doesn't meet the bar. How do you respond to that critique?
Mrs. Cramp-Nyman.
Well, I'd expect nothing less from the Liberals to comment that way about it. Of course, let's be clear what this is. It's an opposition day motion, one of the tools the opposition have to hold the government to account. Parliament has not pronounced itself on the status of the MOU. This is an opportunity to do that. But it's very clear, as the Conservatives said, this is an opportunity to demonstrate that there actually is opposition within the Liberal caucus and maybe even within the Liberal cabinet to the MOU itself. And, a good opposition day motion makes it very difficult to support or oppose it. And we've heard all sorts of things today that says that the Liberals were considering voting for it and then changed their minds. And at the end of the day, a lot of this isn't for wide public consumption. It's to demonstrate that there are divisions within the Liberal caucus. And I think after the last month in the budget, it's a little bit of schadenfreude from the Conservatives too to say, you say we have divisions. We'll just look at you across the aisle. You're a pretty divided team as well.
Well, I got to jump in there, Gary, because they definitely have disagreements on this, and they definitely had a resignation from cabinet. But Stephen Guilbeault is still in caucus and still says he supports the Prime Minister. He just doesn't like this policy, right? So that's not I'm defecting over leadership, and this is not a vote on the MOU.
No, but
a resignation from
cabinet.
I'm not minimizing it.
Big deal.
I'm not minimizing it at all. But my point is, this is not a vote on the MOU, right? This is a vote on 6 paragraphs that paraphrase or lift selectively from the MOU. Why not do a vote on the entire MOU if you want to show if there is real disagreement?
Well, the Conservatives amended it to include more things from the MOU because the Liberals were flipping back and forth on it. Look, this is an opportunity, like I said, for the opposition to make it clear that they too are the only party which full thoroughly supports the energy industry. And as you clip from Mr. Poilievre said very clearly, there's only one party that does that, and Mr. Carney is actually signaling to his caucus that, don't worry about it, we won't actually fulfill this. So I think it's a good day of politics for the Conservatives.
Okay, Andrew, I have not seen signals from Mr. Carney or anyone at the senior levels of government that they do not intend to fulfill this. They lost Stephen Guilbeault. They've got resignations from the Net Zero Committee. They've got frustrations in BC and in Quebec, yet they persist. So until I hear it from someone other than Mr. Poilievre, I don't know that they really don't intend to do it. Corey Hogan, Eleanor Roshevsky, they all tell me they want to get a pipeline done. Just Alberta's got to do the work.
Well, I think that that's what this comes down to. And the point is that this motion, the Conservatives have really kneecapped themselves on it by failing to actually ask the simple question of whether Parliament supports the MOU or not. By cherry picking this, what they've done, it's actually told us two important things, I think, today. One is that there is an implicit criticism from the Poilievre camp towards Premier Smith and her camp, who negotiated the carbon price increase and the other package, other carbon pricing pieces that went into that. That's a pretty big division. That'll only play out, of course, in Alberta, where the politics are quite different on that. The second piece that I think that's very interesting is that Carney doubled down that it has to be all of the agreement, that there are in fact not going to be any loopholes. In fact, the timelines that are built into it are going to be important. And seeing that Alberta does actually live up to its part seems to be conditional before any kind of referral to the Major Projects Office happens on Carney's part. So even though there's this kind of a silly politics that's going on by the Conservatives with cherry picking it, I think we did see two very important things that tell us a lot about where this agreement sits within the two parties.
Tonda, I mean, what do you make of this? The accusation is that Mark Carney isn't serious about this. The government isn't serious about this. They don't really intend to do a pipeline. I don't know.
I would love to actually hear. I mean, I think the Conservatives are not wrong also in trying to plumb the depths of the Prime Minister's personal commitment to a pipeline.
Yeah. How much capital will they use to get it through?
He hasn't publicly said, I want to see a pipeline. I want to get to yes. He said, if all of these other things are equal, then we want to get to a pipeline. But, where does his ultimate, I think, development impulse lie? Does he think it's a good idea to put a pipeline across the BC Northwest to the Pacific Coast? Or does he believe the pipeline to Keystone XL expansion is the way to go, or TMX? We don't actually have a clear, I think, statement or declaration from the Prime Minister on that. So in that regard, I kind of welcome any clarity we get. And what we're getting more in, as the days go by since the signing of the MOU, is we're getting a bit more clarity on how Mr. Carney sees the role of Indigenous peoples and the need for agreement, the role of consultation with the BC government, and, does there have to be agreement? But it's, I think, all of it kind of a piecemeal, because he didn't actually do a full-on news conference on this yet.
Right. But on this, when you read the plain black and white on page 2, the projects include construction of one or more private sector constructed and financed pipelines with Indigenous people co-ownership and economic benefits. And they talk about if the
priority to Asian markets.
Right. So if the conditions are met, they will to a deep water port, though. That's the trick there, right?
Yep.
So this is what they talk about deeper in it. That, I mean, they have signed an agreement, lost the minister, and getting hammered by environmentalists. If they're not serious about it, this is a pretty dumb way to do politics.
I think the MOU is a pretty serious piece of political work that we can give both Daniel Smith and Mark Carney. But built into it are many uncertainties and many challenges. And what we don't necessarily know is what is make or break. Is it an all or nothing, take it or leave it agreement? Do the methane regulations and the commitment to meet them, does that fall by the wayside if there's no pipeline? Does the agreement on artificial intelligence data centers and electrical interties between the provinces, does that drop off if there's no agreement or reaching a deal on a pipeline and carbon capture? What is there? That's a substantive piece of work, but I think there's still questions, and they're questions that both Liberals are asking themselves, and also Conservatives, it must be said, haven't also clearly laid out how they think any carbon plan, a reduction of emissions plan, could work. They haven't laid that out.
Right. So, Supriya, how do you read it? I mean, do you think they're serious about getting a pipeline done? I mean, they say they are. They've got an MOU with the government of Alberta. I mean, there's no proponent yet. But how do you view what's going on?
Yeah, I mean, I think you'd have to be serious in order to do all the legwork and to be willing to lose a minister and be willing to, get clobbered by environmentalists and NGOs, and I'm sure that the BC MPs and a few Quebec MPs are hearing from their constituents as well over this. So yeah, like I'd have to assume that they're serious. But it's interesting that if you listen to a lot of the more hardcore folks that were at the UCP AGM a couple of weeks ago, or last week, I guess, it was the booing that ensued for Danielle Smith, and a lot of what you're hearing from the separatist contingent or the independence movement within Alberta is kind of based on that same reasoning that the Prime Minister isn't serious about this and he's signed this but isn't actually going to go through with it. And if you, listen to a few other, more liberal or progressive leaning folks, that also is sort of what they're saying, that, this lays out the conditions for a pipeline, but those conditions are effectively not really going to end up being met. And that this is really some, showcase of 3D chess playing on behalf of the Prime Minister, because ultimately, being, an economics guy, there isn't really much of an economic case to build more pipelines. I don't buy into any of that. I think it's quite clear that if a politician is going to, burn a lot of political capital trying to get something done, then it stands to reason that they are serious about it and want it to get done. I think ultimately, if you're going through all of these motions and, there is a roadblock, or there isn't a private sector proponent that's wanting to come through, I don't think that's a good news story for the Prime Minister. I think that ends up being more headache for him.
No, I mean, look, there's a lot of Liberals concerned that you get all the downside of rolling back your environmental rules and none of the upside of an actual pipeline. So why would you just do this as a political exercise? Because there's only downside, really, that you get when it comes to seat count. Okay, there's 22 seconds left as they vote on the Conservative Party pipeline motion. This is the amendment. Then there's going to be a reset. There's going to be 2 minutes. And then they will start voting all over again on whatever the finalized version of the bill is, or the motion is. Mark Carney is not there. He will be voting remotely. Pierre Poilievre is not there. I was not wrong when I said I did not see him. I'm told by his office he has an event, but he will be voting remotely. 139 yeas to the amendment, 195 nays, which means the amendment, the further adding of words to the motion, does not pass. So they go back to the original motion, which was a loose paraphrase of language in the MOU, which is 6 pages long versus the 1 paragraph sort of summary. So Gary, they're going to go back and vote on the original motion. I mean, I'm not surprised you didn't get the Bloc or the New Democrats or the Greens to side with the Conservative amendment here. Neither of the leaders here. This is such an important thing that it needs to be done to show who's serious about pipelines, and Mark Carney and Pierre Poilievre aren't in the House. That's interesting.
Well, I think Mark Carney doesn't want to be in the House. He doesn't want to be seen to be voting in any way, shape, or form. The visual of him voting against this, lest his critics take that into account. You heard from Mr. Poilievre's office about why he wasn't there. I can't vouch for that one way or another. But having MPs having events is a thing, and the electronic voting allows you to do this. But I just want to go back to something Supriya said, which I thought was interesting. Talking about Danielle Smith getting booed at the UCP AGM, but she also had a very important line in her speech where she basically acknowledged the views of those present and the concerns that those people have. Said, look, we're Albertans. We've had the rug pulled out from under us many times. So show me, let's prove it. I think both Danielle Smith and Mark Carney obviously have a lot of political capital in making sure this MOU and the main pieces of it get done, whether some of the sub areas around data centers and AI and nuclear get done. I think they're nice to haves in there, but they're not the core of the MOU. But I think Danielle Smith was speaking very, very clearly to that base, saying, look, I get your frustrations, but you have me there to help push the fight further, and I'm putting the political capital in. You can trust me to exert as much effort I can do to get this thing over the line.
Right, but Andrew, remote voting is suddenly in vogue with the Conservative caucus, it seems, right? Scott Reid and Andrew Scheer were using it. Gary giving the thumb down there, on the budget confidence. Pierre, this is Pierre Poilievre's motion that he tried to amend. This is an important thing, and not there. I mean, does this just add weight to what the Liberals are saying, that this is really just a gimmick and not a serious attempt at things? I mean, I know he's voting remotely, and that's going to happen, but he's not there physically in person. I mean, does that matter?
Yeah, certainly the optics of it aren't good for him. I suspect it would be more problematic if the Prime Minister was there and voting and Poilievre wasn't. But it's not it just kind of, again, shows that a lot of this is just the gamesmanship that's going on here. So I'm not sure that there's much more to be read into it. But, again, the problem that we've got is there's this MOU. Nobody's sure whether it's, real, whether it's bankable. We're certainly not hearing anything from the business community that I'm aware of that says that there's any real interest at this point in starting the process back up for a Northern Gateway type pipeline. And there's a number of questions kind of bounding around. I mean, even your segment just a few minutes ago with Microsoft certainly didn't seem to be a lot of enthusiasm for, hey, let's go build our data center in Alberta, as they were talking about what they were looking at. So it's hard to tell what exactly the material benefit of this MOU is. But certainly the politics on it will play out for some time and on a number of issues. I disagree with Gary that the add-ons on the data center and the energy upgrades and the Indigenous piece and the BC agreement are somehow not important, that this really is only about the pipeline. Mm-hmm. Obviously, there's a lot more to it, and Smith needs to show that she's got a plan to diversify Alberta's economy.
Can I just jump in there?
Yeah, go ahead.
I think they are important, but I think they are subsidiary to the main part here, which was getting an agreement, getting a pipeline. And I think for the Liberals, the carbon pricing was obviously getting Alberta to agree to that was also a major plank for them as well. So I think there's like tier 1 and tier 2 pieces in this piece. And just because the data centers and the nuclear side of this is such a long-term, 2050, 2060 kind of timeline. That's why I think you have to divide it into tier 1 and tier 2 priorities.
Right, but I mean, this is why the whole MOU is not what's being put in the motion, right, Gary? Because the Conservatives don't want to vote in favor of something that has industrial carbon pricing in it. I mean, that's why.
Well, I think their main point here, this is about the energy side of the equation, and they are trying to obviously demonstrate that even though Mark Carney says a good game about energy, there's only one party that you can trust to advance Canada's energy industry, and that's the Conservative Party.
Okay, so just to bring you up to speed on what's happening inside the House of Commons, we saw that initial vote, 139 yay, 195 nay on the amendment. That was defeated. What MPs have apparently now agreed to is that vote will stand for the actual motion. So they're not going to get up and do the dramatic roll call vote all over again without either of the two principal leaders in the House of Commons voting remotely. So the results of this being known, Tanda, they're just going to proceed as if they were normal and move on and vote. Nothing to see here. Final score, 139 yes, 195 no. Not the end of the battle over the pipelines. I mean, where do you think this particular thing goes next? Because Danielle Smith is doing her work in Alberta as the proponent of record for the moment. She's got to get BC to agree to some sort of things, the First Nations. Those may be insurmountable. This is not going away for a long time. This is something we're going to be talking about for months, because there is an April 1st deadline to reach some of these deals on carbon pricing, industrial carbon pricing. And then there's a July 1st deadline for other parts of the agreement. So really, this is something we're going to be talking about for a long time, and not just because everybody senses there might be some divisions within each caucus on it, but because we're going to hear from provinces as well. Quebec, BC have their concerns. Ontario wants clean electricity regulations to apply here. So it's not going away. This was a bit of political theater, perhaps. I don't see that anyone won the social media captured day, and that it's all going to be all over Twitter as an outrage. I don't see that came out of the debate today or out of the vote, because neither of the main leaders was there. Yeah, it's an interesting thing. I'm trying to get clarification on why Mr. Poilievre isn't there, and I'm getting answers like, well, why isn't Mark Carney there? Well, it's not his motion. He's made clear how he feels about it. So I don't know, Supriya, I mean, where do you think that, like, this was a tactic today, and the Liberals called BS on it and said we're not going to play that game, and that's clearly what happened. And it seems as if there is no one else willing to go along with it. So here we are. I mean, but there is a rolling back of climate policy in Alberta, and now Me Too requests, and climate expert after climate expert after climate expert says forget 2030, forget 2035, you're not hitting those targets, and 2050 doesn't look like it's going to happen either. So where does this leave things?
Yeah, not great. I think everything's a little bit suboptimal all around. Not meeting our targets, I know that can seem somewhat abstract and esoteric, but I mean, it's going to have tangible impacts for folks on the ground. It's going to have tangible impacts for our kids, our grandkids. And I think, if we're zooming out just a little bit from the MOU to look at more of just the general environment, if you look at the Building Canada Act, for example, like there's several First Nations in Ontario that have already filed a legal challenge to the Build Canada Act, right? So it's like the MOU refers to the Building Canada Act. If that gets, if they're successful in terms of their legal challenge, what happens there? So to Tanda's point, I don't think this is going away anytime soon. I think you're going to start to see quite a bit of, organized opposition in terms of standing up for the Great Bear Rainforest that we haven't really seen yet. All we've really heard and have talked about are, the pro-pipeline view for the most part, and how it's needed to diversify our economy. It's needed to, shore up different partners. We can't just leave resources in the ground at a time of economic uncertainty, et cetera, et cetera. And all of those are very compelling arguments and have certainly, if your polling is to believe, is to be believed, is the majority or the plurality of the opinion of Canadians. But I don't know. I would just wait and see until you've got an organized sort of campaign kind of tugging at the heartstrings of Canadiana identity, of of that rainforest, of bears, of Canadian wilderness, of orcas swimming about, and that potentially being harmed by this. So I think it's too early to call this one way or another in terms of what way the public will land and where the politics end up.
Well, so Gary, on that one, you were part of the government staff when Northern Gateway was approved, I believe, in 2014, right? And then in 2016, the Federal Court of Appeal ruled that the consultation was insufficient, overturned it, and then in 2019, the tanker ban went into place, which killed it as an option. Maybe resurrected by this MOU and the willingness to roll back the tanker ban if conditions are met. But if you look at the fight that was put up against the idea of a bitumen pipeline, not an LNG pipeline, through that particular part of BC, the First Nations there are gearing up for that fight again. It's not about emissions necessarily. It is about old-fashioned conservation. They don't want the disruption to the wildlife and the damage that a spill there could have. I mean, is there a world where the consent of the First Nations in that area can be achieved? Because it seems very difficult, as we talk right now, to see them surrendering in a fight that they did not want to give up on the last couple of times.
Well, we can be sure one thing. We know that there will be a well-funded end-go attack on Mr. Carney's MOU, Ms. Smith's MOU, and the idea of a pipeline whatsoever. Now, a lot of that money is foreign. It comes from foreign sources. It has in the past, and we fully expect that the Rockefeller Foundation and other organizations will be putting a lot of money into that. But we all know, too, that First Nations are not a unified front on this. There are many First Nations who are in favor of a pipeline.
In British Columbia, a bitumen pipeline, like in Alberta, I get it, the Métis and everything, but once you get into British Columbia and the territory where this goes, we are trying to find a First Nations group who supports this, and we can't.
But this will be a First Nation group in Alberta versus a First Nation group in BC. Whether there are that come out in BC, we'll see. But this is not a unified front for First Nations. Some of them are very much in favor of this. Ellis Ross, Conservative MP from Northwest BC, has always been in favor of a pipeline to port. So this battle, I agree with you. This battle is just getting started, and there's going to be a lot of advocacy against it. But Canadians, in a lot of ways, I think, the last election proved it, said, the way of doing business previously and the 10 years of regulatory weight that the Trudeau government placed on is not the way to achieve a growing economy. And so we'll have to see how it goes. But I think Canadians voted very strongly in the last election on their position on resource development.
Andrew, your thoughts on this? I mean, look, I know there are First Nations in Alberta. They're fine with this. They support this. They want in. The Great Bear Initiative of the Coastal First Nations, that represents a lot of groups. They are pretty unified in not wanting this, and I've not seen a leadership voice in the area where the pipeline could potentially go that's on board with it. It just seems like there is no willing partner on that side of the Rockies.
Well, I think that is the problem, and it's obviously a difficulty that the Carney government had in failing to do any consultation with the First Nations to start with, or with the British Columbia government, or prepare BC voters for what's coming here. This notion that somehow Canadians vote as a unified group across a set of issues that are all the same is pretty rare. Politics is pretty local. And as we've talked about before, this has the potential to be a vote-determining issue in a number of ridings that works against the Liberals' newfound coalition as of the last voter coalition as of the last election. And certainly I think tonight's vote is probably the cleanest in terms of what we're seeing for a potential outcome for the Bloc and the NDP to work with. The question of whether or not there is some kind of expansion of pipelines across the country, whether those are going west into Vancouver or whether they are going east over across the Great Lakes into Quebec and off to the Atlantic coast, is still, I think, one that is very much alive in terms of debate and discussion, and certainly one that government can work with. The fact that the Conservatives, and for what it seems, some members of the business community are solely fixated on going through the rainforests of northern BC and disrupting the tanker ban, putting that entire fishery at risk up there, is problematic. And I think that's one of the things that's really yet to be seen is, as this debate evolves over the next few months, will there be more detail, will there be more nuance, will there be more maturity brought into it to start to define what the alternatives are? I don't disagree that there is a strong kind of sense within the country that those who are of the leave it in the ground group are in the very small minority. But the question of how resources are extracted continues to be one of debate, and where they're shipped and how they're developed has to be part of that equation. And I think to somehow argue that it's all just washed aside by the great idea that we don't want to leave it in the ground is an incorrect assumption.
Yeah, look, there is tanker traffic from Alaska to the continental United States in that area, but it doesn't go through the Hecate Strait, which is that narrow strip of water that you potentially need to navigate if it goes into Kitimat or Prince Rupert, and that's where the concerns come in there, Tonda. But, we have, they were watching the vote in Parliament. Christine Smith-Martin is the CEO of the Coastal First Nations Great Bear Initiative, and Gaguis Jason Alsop, the president of the Haida Nation. They're on their way here now from Parliament Hill to talk about what they just saw. But they've made it very clear that they're never going to get on board with this.
They don't see any way to put oil tanker traffic through that strait, and they made that clear today when they spoke on Parliament Hill. But look, I think just to the points that everybody's been making, it is early days. What's very interesting to me is that the public opinion polls that show a large number of Canadians have an awareness of this energy deal, and more detail than you might otherwise expect for a complex deal. And right now, a majority are supporting the idea of developing Canada's resources and the idea of, if all those other conditions are equal, building a pipeline. So that to me is interesting, and let's see how that plays out once we understand the depth of BC's disagreement with the idea of a pipeline to the Pacific Northwest and the Indigenous communities as they weigh in as well. I think it's fluid. I think public opinion is fluid, but what's really interesting to me is that a lot of people absorbed the complexity over the last couple of weeks, and the numbers show that they're siding with the Carney initiative.
Right, and so Supriya, this is an interesting thing that we saw the numbers that came out last week. Angus Reid and Abacus, very similar top-line numbers,
That's right.
53% in favor, 58% in favor. I can't remember which was which, but a majority, not a plurality, were in favor. So broad support. Caucus, after Guilbeault and some unrest, has stabilized. Constituencies, though, I wonder about, right? Because the lower mainland of BC, the Liberals are down there and the NDP are up, and the Conservatives have gained a bit on the crime issue, and Léger has the Liberals and the Bloc tied in Quebec. This issue is that's seats in play. That even if you may get a bunch of second-place finishes in Conservative seats in Saskatchewan and Alberta, but a bunch of second-place finishes in Liberal seats in Quebec and BC because of this.
Yeah, like I said, suboptimal, right? This is not sort of ideal, and it can shake out any number of ways. I would also point out that, in Quebec, there is a right to a healthy environment in a way that I don't know that any other province is really codified. So, we tend to be a little bit more environmentally conscious. It tends to be a point of pride. So that doesn't surprise me that there are a bunch of, potential seats that could flip. And I would imagine that Mr. Guilbeault's appearance on Tout le monde en parle, Tonda mentioned that he had a piece in the Toronto Star. He also had a French piece in La Presse. Like, he seems to be firing on all cylinders, at least when it comes to the comms machine here to get his message out. People are absorbing that. And so, I think, again, like, to go back to my earlier point, I think right now, if you're looking at polling, it has settled on a plurality of folks are in favor of a pipeline, but that's also with the caveat of it being qualified more often than not as, being tied directly to our economy. And this will mean, I presume, in the minds of those that are receiving the question from the pollsters, to better economic times for themselves and their friends and their family. And that's also going to be a challenge, is like connecting that sort of macro idea to the micro kitchen table sort of issues. You can have a pipeline, but if it's being sold to people as it's going to improve everybody's economic fortunes, and then it doesn't really end up doing that, or we end up getting more information that, well, actually it'll mean X amount of jobs, Y amount of them are permanent or full-time or whatever. But I don't know, like, people need to be able to connect those issues to their day-to-day lives. And right now, I don't really see that being made. Of course, it's, again, very early days. We don't even have a private proponent. We don't have a route. We don't have anything. So, like, all of that will come. But that's what I mean when I say it's really early days.
Right. Well, we'll see if all of that will come. I mean, by the summer, we'll find out if there's going to be a private sector proponent. Okay, look, we know the vote failed, 139 to 195. Conservative House Leader Andrew Scheer just spoke to reporters after his party's pipeline motions failed. Have a listen to this.
I just can't believe the Liberals voted against their own MOU. I think what's clear now is that Mark Carney...
Why was Pierre Poilievre not in the House, sir? Why was Pierre Poilievre not in the House?
What's clear is that Mark Carney has no intention of actually getting a pipeline.
Why did your leader vote virtually on his own motion, sir?
Okay. Why did Mark Carney vote virtually? Another question, not his motion, but, his intention, he says, to get a pipeline here. Gary, what do you make of this? He says they voted against their own MOU, which is not correct because the MOU wasn't put to a vote. It was a summary and bits of it. But you saw there questions being asked about why Pierre Poilievre wasn't there. What are your thoughts on what Mr. Scheer had to say?
Well, I think now we're into the battle of the comments from either side. The Liberals will say, they had their press conference earlier today saying, oh, this is a nothing motion, this is Conservative playing politics. Conservatives very clearly saying that this is very, Liberals are actually opposed to the MOU. Can't really trust them when they say they support an MOU. There's trouble in the caucus. And so you're going to see this continue to battle out, both on social media and from both sides, probably in fundraising as well. So, but let's remember where we are. This is a minority parliament. These are the things that happen in minority parliaments. Plus ça change. You can go back over the last number of minority parliaments, and these are sort of events that happen in the course of a minority parliament. It's a moment in time, and I actually think probably 6 weeks from now, after people go away for the Christmas break and we're through January, we will probably not be talking about this MOU vote. We will talk about the MOU, but probably not the vote as much as we like to think we are, living sometimes in the Ottawa bubble.
Well, I mean, you do have a party led by an MP from Alberta questioning the veracity of a MOU signed by the government of Alberta, right? Andrew, this is what I wonder about, is what does this do in, because Danielle Smith has she's got a difficult constituency to pull together out there. And if you really want to find out how the Liberal caucus feels on the MOU, just table the MOU your next opposition day and say yes or no, right?
Well, that's the point, right? And I think, if anything, what this shows is just really how terrible the Conservative House leadership is. They had an opportunity to put a nice, clean motion in front of the House. Do you support the MOU? Do you not support the MOU? But because of internal bickering and some kind of ideologically hidebound position that the Conservative leadership takes, they refuse to accept that what Danielle Smith has negotiated might actually be in the best interest of Albertans. And so they've come forward with this ham-handed approach. They've ended up with not a clean vote or a clean message. The Liberals can argue all sorts of technicalities around what this actually means or doesn't mean. And it, to me, just shows again what kind of a shambles of an opposition that they've got and why they really cannot
come on
these kind of issues.
Come on,
Gary,
shambles.
But look, why would you not put forward Why would you not put forward a clean motion that says, I support the MOU or not support the MOU, if what you're trying to show is a division within the Liberal caucus? Instead, what you're holding on to is this hidebound view that Pierre Poilievre knows better than Danielle Smith what's important to Albertans. He's been in the province,
They showed
3
there's
times in
division
the
of the
last
Liberal
6
caucus
months?
with this motion. We spent the last 24, 36 hours debating whether there was division of the Liberal caucus on this. So I think it's
but then you can't even put forward a clean motion to actually test it because you're so caught up on the internal politics of the Conservative Party.
Okay.
We're not going to be talking in 6 days, let alone 6 weeks from now, about the internal machinations of what was in, what was outside of this MOU. We're inside the Ottawa Republic here, and it's important for the next 24, 36 hours.
Okay,
but come on, let's be real.
Okay, Tanda, last 30 seconds to you. Do you think this minority parliament is going to last? I feel like we're headed towards an election before my birthday in May.
Yeah, well, mine's in March, so...
Who gets to celebrate on the campaign
when is
trail?
the fiscal update in the spring?
Yeah,
I don't
exactly.
know. I'm not putting any money on no election next year.
Yeah, okay. All right, well, we'll see. We'll see if we're still talking about the MOU and the machinations and the motions and all of these things. We'll see where question period goes tomorrow. But you know, if Gary, if they don't lead off saying, why did you vote against the MOU tomorrow, then what does that tell us? Did it work? Did it not work? I don't know. We got to say goodbye.
1 day left of Parliament.
we got to say goodbye to the Power Panel. Supreme Vetti, Gary Keller, Andrew Thompson, and Tanda McCharles. Thank you all very much.